Welcome back to True Crime Lounge. We are on episode 4 of season 3. And this season, we are using the theme irony. Before I continue, I do have a YouTube channel. I also have a Patreon that you can go and support as well. I also have a merch shop that you can go and check out. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Now, since I have all that out of the way, why don't we dive into today's episode? We're almost halfway through. Can y'all believe that? It's kind of crazy right there. I actually do have a shirt on, I promise, guys. I promise. But anyway, today we are going to be talking about Lonnie Franklin Jr. Why does his name sound familiar? Well, he's been also known as the Grim Sleeper. Franklin is a serial killer that was active from 1985 to 1985 to 2007. He has at least 10 to 25 plus victims, with his methodology being shooting and strangulation. He was dubbed the Grim Ripper because he appeared to have taken a 14-year-old break from crimes from his crimes in 1988 to 2002. In July 2010, he was arrested as a suspect. After many delays, his trial will begin in 2016, and on May 5th, 2016, he was convicted of killing 9 women and 1 teenage girl. On June 6th, the jury recommended the death sentence, and on August 10th, 2016, LA the Superior Court sentenced him to death for each of the 10 victims named in the verdict. Franklin was born August 1952, and he grew up in central LA. He married he married and had 2 children. He was given a general discharge from the U.S. Army July 4th, 1975. And he won't be the only one we talked about who was served in the Army on this season. After the police would discover several dead women in the alleyway, and coming from alleyways and dumpsters in South LA during the mid-1980s, the LA County Sheriff's Department and police began investigating the murders. He was setting up a Southside Slayer task force. At this time, the police thought the murders were committed by one person labeled a Southside Slayer, and the crimes were announced in the public September 23rd, 1985. Eventually, the LAPD and the sheriff's detectives realized that several serial killers were murdering women, and it was a difficult task for detectives to decide which murders were linked. Amongst their other murders, Louis Crane and Daniel Lee Siebert committed 2 of the murders. Which, speaking of Daniel Lee Siebert, I do believe I do have an episode on him already, so you can. I think that was my very first episode on my channel, so you can go check that out as well. Anyway, Crane and Siebert committed at least 2 of the murders each, and Ivan Hill and Michael Hughes at least 1. A separate series of killings commenced in the murder of Deborah Jackson, with a different MO involving a firearm. These became misleadingly known as the Strawberry Murders. 2 decades later, the perpetrator of these crimes would be named the Grim Reaper, due to a long period of apparent inactivity between crimes. In May 2007, the murder of Janicia Peters, who was 25, was linked to a DNA analysis to 11, possibly 12 unsolved murders in Los Angeles. The first of which occurred in 1985. The 800 Task Force was then formed, consisting of 7 detectives. After 4 months of investigation, the LA Weekly investigative reporter Christine Plesk broke the news, and the secret 800 Task Force the linking of Peter's killing a string of murders going back to 23 years, and the fact that Mayor Antonio Velgosio and Police Chief William Bratton have been silent on the killer's existence. The mayor and the chief never had an issue, never issued a press release nor warned the South LA community of the killer's activities. In some cases, the alternative newspapers was the first to inform the families that their daughters had been alone confirmed to victims of serial killer. In March 2009, Christine Pulaski of the LA Weekly did an extensive interview with Inetra Washington, the sole survivor of the Grim Reaper's attacks, and she described him as a black man in his early 30s who looked neat, tidy, kinda geeky. He wore a black polo shirt tucked into his khaki trousers. She also described him as a thin, neat, polite, and well-groomed African-American guy. He owned an orange Ford Pinto with a white stripe on the hood. And when she mentioned a party he definitely invited himself to, and she said that he was he was welcome to come. He then said that he needed to stop briefly at his uncle's house. And it was so. And they would begin arguing. And the killer apparently documented his attacks with a Polaroid camera. She blacked out, but was startled by the bright flash of the camera. The man had taken her picture and sexually assaulted her. And she remembers grabbing at him and the two struggled, and she pleaded to be taken to the hospital. He refused, despite her half-conscious condition. She also was certain that he couldn't take her to the hospital because he didn't want to get caught. Ironically enough, he does get caught. In the late 2008, August 2008, the same week of the Weekly broke the sole survivor story with information of the Grim Sleeper's body count was 13 victims. An aide to Police Chief William Bratton, and he was too busy to comment on the case. In early September 2008, officials in Los Angeles announced that they were offering $500,000 reward to help catch the killer, who had murdered at least 10 women and a man in two sprees over the past 20 years. On November 1st, 2008, a story about the Grim Reaper appeared on television in the program for America's Most Wanted, and the program stated that the killer was most likely a black male, but did not want to rule anyone out. On February 25th, 2009, for the first time, Chief Bratton had held a press conference at which the police formally gave the killer the Grim Reaper nickname chosen by LA Weekly. Bratton then refused to release a call from 1980s she made to 911 operator, in which a man reports having seen a body, which later turned out to be the victim of the Grim Reaper, getting dumped by the killer. In a detailed description, the license plate number of the van connected with the now closed Cosmopolitan Church. In December 2009, the LAPD re-released the original photo sketch of the Grim Reaper based on a description given in 1988. And by only his survivor, Inetra Washington. The sketch showed a black male with postmarks across both cheeks. December 2009, the LAPD released a three age enhancement composite drawing in which the faces of three middle-aged black men. On July 7, 2010, The LA Times reported that the arrest had been reported, and the DA, Steve Cooley, identified the suspect as 57-year-old Lonnie Franklin Jr., a mechanic who worked between 1981 and 1989 in the city of LA in the sanitation department, was briefly for a brief sanitation department and briefly for the police department. And the arrest of Franklin reportedly was due, at least in part, to the use of familial DNA analysis. So, police have been unable to find the exact match between DNA found at the crime scene associated with the Grim Reaper in any of these profiles in the California DNA's profile database. Thus, police searched the database to try to find stored profiles and demonstrate sufficient similarity to the profiles from the crime scene evidence to allow them to infer a familial relationship with the person who left who left the DNA at the crime. Police eventually located DNA belonging to Franklin's son, Christopher, who was convicted of felony weapons. And according to the LADA, Steve Cooley, detectives didn't use the piece of discarded pizza from Franklin's DNA to make the link. One undercover police pretended to be a server at a restaurant where a suspect ate, where he collected dishes, silverware, and glasses, and pizza crust to obtain DNA. The identification was used to arrest Franklin after his DNA was obtained and deemed a match. Saliva found his victim's breast was used to obtain DNA match this Lincoln Franklin to the murderers. Law enforcement missed an opportunity to catch Franklin because his DNA was never collected. In 2003, he was convicted of a felony and was serving 3 years of supervised probation. When he was on probation, his DNA was supposed to enter the DNA database. In 2004, voters approved of the Proposition 69, and the law states that DNA must be collected from all people charged with a crime. It also requires the expansion of the DNA database. Authorities collected and sorted through thousands of DNA samples, and on July 2005, Franklin was on unsupervised probation, and during that time, his DNA never entered the system. Surprise, surprise. So, probation officers did not collect DNA samples from people that on unsupervised probation because the periods of November 2004 to August 2005. And during that period, the probation department did not have the resources to immediately collect samples. Officers did not collect samples until August 2005. Franklin had a criminal record dating back to 1989. He was convicted on 2 charges of stolen property, one charge of misdemeanor assault, and 1 charge of battery. He served for one of the charges of the stolen property. He was charged with 10 homicides and 1 attempted murder. And he is held without bail and could face the death penalty if convicted. He is not charged with the death of the 11th suspected victim, an African American man. There was no DNA evidence in that case. I don't think this would have helped him anyway, but still, that's just my opinion. So, on December 16, 2010, the Los Angeles Department released 180 photos of a woman found in Franklin's home. Police officials released the images of unsuccessful attempts to identify the individuals, possibly additional. And it was believed that there could be investigators found over 1,000 photos. Like, that's crazy. Imagine carrying 1,000 photos of your victims around. The image showed mainly African American women with varied age range from teenagers to middle aged and older, often nude. Police believe that Franklin took as many photos, which showed both conscious and unconscious individuals that date back to 30 years. And the photos were released in an effort to identify the woman with the help of citizens. On November 3rd, 2011, the report Reuters reported that the police were considering Lonnie David Franklin as a suspect in sorry guys, something came across my screen for a minute. Anyway, in the slayings of additional 6 females. The police investigated 2 of the 6 as potential victims killed during the 14-year lapse between the initial space of the Grim Reaper murders that ended in 1988, and several more that began in 2002. Of the remaining 4 victims, 2 bodies were discovered in 1980, and the 2 reported them missing in 2005, but remains of the 2 were never found. Detectives said that linked Franklin to 6 additional killings, and after reviewing hundreds of old cases filed and seeking the public's help and identify a collection of 180 photographs of women who were found on, on May 5th, 2016, and after nearly 3 months of trial and in a day and a half of jury deliberation, Lonnie David Franklin was convicted of 10 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. And on June 6, 2016, a Los Angeles County sentenced the serial killer to death. Closing an argument, important legal chapter in the grisly slayings that terrorized South LA for more than 2 decades. The known victims began in 1985 in South LA, and the Grim Sleeper took a 14-year hiatus after his last murder in 1988 and began murdering again in 2002. His last confirmed murder was in July 2007. All of his victims were found outdoors. A few from the downtown Los Angeles area. All but one of his victims were black females. One he has suspected was a black man, and many of the victims were prostitutes. One witness recalled Franklin would frequently bring prostitutes into his home, and then he would have sexual contact with his victims before strangling and shooting them. There is a 2014 film by British filmmaker Nick Bloomberg, who created a documentary about this serial killer called Tales of the Grim Reaper. But yes, that's it for today's episode. I will see y'all next time. Y'all have a great day.